Welcome to Homeschool Art. Today we're going to be talking about Michelangelo. Michelangelo was born Michelangelo di Ludovico Buonarroti Simoni, but we call him Michelangelo. Michelangelo was born March 6th, 1475 in Caprese, near Arezzo, Italy. When Michelangelo was a little boy, he displayed artistic talent, and so when he reached the age of 13, he was apprenticed to Domenico Ghirlandaio in Florence. In Florence, he developed his skills. He worked on his painting and his drawing before turning his attention to sculpture. Michelangelo was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet. Michelangelo was one of the main artists during the Renaissance period. In 1508, Pope Julius II came to Michelangelo and said, "Hey, Mike, I want you to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel." The Sistine Chapel is located in Rome. Now, when the Pope came to him, Michelangelo said, "I'm really not a painter, I'm a sculptor." And the Pope said, "But I want you to paint it anyway." Michelangelo said yes. I think he said yes for a couple of reasons. First, the Pope was a very influential person and he was willing to pay good money. Michelangelo was paid 3,000, and I don't know how to say this, but ducats or ducats. I'm not sure how to say that money, but that equates to about $600,000 in gold. Artists made their money on commissions, and many times they still do that today. When someone influential commissions a piece of art, the hope is that other people will see that work and also commission you to do other works of art. So I think that's one reason why Michelangelo would have said yes. And the money, because that was pretty good money. Also, historically, popes have been extremely powerful men, many times more powerful than kings. You don't lightly turn down a request from a pope. Michelangelo said yes, and he started his work. Now, it took Michelangelo 4 long years to finish the ceiling, and he ran into a few problems. First, the ceiling is 60 feet off the ground. That's really high. And so Michelangelo had to construct scaffolding in order to get himself high enough. There are some people who used to think that Michelangelo laid down on the scaffolding and painted upside down. That's not the case. He built the scaffolding tall enough so that he could stand and paint. Now that really was a difficult situation, and Michelangelo had a sense of humor. He even drew a cartoon of himself bent back in a weird way trying to paint standing up, and he said that he had a neck ache and a backache, and it was just really difficult circumstances to paint. But Michelangelo persevered. He kept going. He brought in other artists that he respected and asked, "How is this looking?" Because it was a barrel vault. That means it's not just a flat ceiling, it's shaped like a barrel, it's rounded. There are all kinds of different challenges when you have to paint a vaulted space. Michelangelo worked in fresco, which is something we'll talk about at the end of the video. Briefly, fresco means you paint on a wet plaster surface. Here's where the next problem came in. Halfway through, he'd been painting about 2 years, and he noticed that there was mold growing on the paint that he'd already finished, on the sections that he'd already finished. And he went to the Pope and he said, "It's not working. It's moldy. I don't think I can finish this. I've spent 2 years and it's ruined." And the Pope said, "You're going to finish and we will get someone in to help you." And so somebody was brought in to fix the mold, and they were able to clean it off, and he was able to keep going. The last problem I'm going to talk about is that the Pope came in close to when Michelangelo was finished. He wasn't done yet, but he came in towards the end and he said, "This is beautiful. I love it. I want to bring my friends in to see." And Michelangelo said, "It's not done. I don't want to show people unfinished work, and I would have to take down all of my scaffolding and get everything out." And the Pope said, "Okay, take down your scaffolding. I want to show my friends." So Michelangelo had to deconstruct all of his scaffolding, take out all of his tools and clean the area. And the Pope brought in his friends and they oohed and ahed and said how wonderful it was. And then once they left, Michelangelo had to bring everything back in and construct it again. So after 4 years, this masterpiece was complete. Michelangelo painted 9 scenes from the book of Genesis, including the creation of Adam, the creation of Eve, and the fall of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. The most important and the most famous part of the Sistine Chapel is the creation of Adam. It depicts God reaching out to touch Adam's finger, symbolizing the moment of giving life to humanity. A long time later, in the 1530s, Michelangelo was hired again to come in and paint the altar wall. On the altar wall, Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment. This massive fresco depicts the final judgment of souls, with Christ in the center, surrounded by angels, saints, and the souls of the deceased, or the dead, who are either rising up to heaven or going down to hell. There was also an interesting time when the people felt like the Sistine Chapel was a little scandalous because there were so many nude or almost nude figures in the Sistine Chapel. There were 300 figures painted. That's 300 separate people painted on the ceiling. It's massive. So there was a man who was hired to come in and paint leaves or little bits of fabric to cover up the most sensitive areas. This is a masterpiece that everyone in the world knows about. I would also counsel you that if you would like to look more closely at it, do so with your parents so that they can talk with you about it. And now for some inspiration. Michelangelo said, "The greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. The true work of art is but a shadow of the divine perfection. If people knew how hard I worked to get my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all. Genius is eternal patience. Good painting is the kind that looks like sculpture. And finally, there is no greater harm than that of time wasted." Now it's project time. Get out a big sheet of paper and tape it on the underside of a table. We're going to paint as if we were Michelangelo, having to look up and paint upside down. We got out acrylics. We decided that we were going to do fairy tales. One of my kids chose Jack and the Beanstalk, Cinderella, the Three Bears, the Three Little Pigs, and Hansel and Gretel. I chose to do the cottage of Hansel and Gretel. So we went outside and it was a little crazy because the wind was blowing and the paper moved up and down, so it was a little difficult. And also it's not super comfortable to sit with your neck cranked down and your arm reaching up trying to paint. It was an interesting opportunity. So I painted the thatch on first and then I did the walls, and the brown and the red with the door and the other candies kind of mixed in together, and it wasn't super bright, but it was a cute little cottage, a very quick painting because everybody else was painting very quickly. And so I painted some bushes and I painted a little fence, like a candy cane fence, some grass, and I called that good. I have so much respect for Michelangelo and the work that he put in. I cannot imagine how hard it would have been not only to have a deadline, but to have someone super important making sure that wanting me to get it perfect, but also the conditions that he was in. 60 feet off the ground, painting in a cramped position for 4 years, and he worked feverishly to get it done in those 4 years, and he did a magnificent job. So now I'll show you what we did as a family. Here we have, it's kind of hard to see, but it's Hansel and Gretel in a kettle of water. Over here, my youngest decided to do the baby bear. Like, it looks like he's standing on the head of the mama bear. But upside down, it's kind of interesting. It's hard to do. And this right here is one of the three little pigs. It's the little pig that's in the straw hut. And this is when he's getting blown about when the big bad wolf huffs and puffs and blows the house down. And so he's kind of in a twirly straw mess. Right down here, this is a Cinderella shoe and a little Cinderella crown. And now I'm gonna have to change around the paper because we all sat underneath and had different vantage points. Okay, this is Jack's house, his little cottage, and then there is the beanstalk, and it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and then it goes to the side because he didn't want to run into his brother's painting. Here's my little cottage, little tree here in the forest, and then here's the thatched roof. It's kind of a mess, but kind of fun too. Everyone had fun doing it, and I think they all learned, but everyone also agreed that it was more difficult to paint upside down, for sure. Art term of the day. Today we're going to be talking about fresco painting. Fresco means fresh, and this is what was commonly used in the Renaissance era. It's mural painting on the wall. They'll take the lime and the plaster together, a powder mix. They mix it all together. Then they put water in it and mix it up until it's kind of wet and gloppy. And then they'll scrape it onto the wall, and then they'll let it dry for a little bit. This little layer of freshly laid plaster on the wall is called intonaco. You mix the dry pigments with room temperature water, and then you start to paint on the intonaco that is still wet. Those pigments merge with the wet plaster and dry and become an integral part of the wall. Michelangelo and Raphael were two famous painters who used fresco. Both Michelangelo and Raphael would carve indentations in the wet plaster so that certain areas of the plaster would create an illusion of depth and could accent certain areas over others. In the School of Athens, which was painted by Raphael, he scraped the indentations around the eyes of people so that they would look hooded or deeper and more pensive. Michelangelo also used this technique as part of his trademark outlining of his central figures within his frescoes. Frescoes date back centuries. There are frescoes that were found in Pompeii, Greece, in lots of other places. Fresco painting can last centuries if done correctly. Thank you so much for visiting Homeschool Art and learning about Michelangelo. I'm going to talk about Michelangelo again in another video, and we'll talk about his sculptures because those were hugely important. Please like and subscribe. Bye.